What purpose keeps me breathing while others have faded? Margaret Webber hurled her teacup against the wall, the porcelain shattering into dozens of pieces across the kitchen floor. The sudden violence of the act shocked even her. This delicate cup had been a wedding gift, survived 57 years of careful use, only to be destroyed in a moment of rage. She gripped her walker, knuckles white, as hot tears burned tracks down her weathered cheeks. What's the point of living to 84 if all I do is watch the world forget I exist? She demanded of the empty room. The silence that answered seemed to mock her. Outside her window, a deer and her fawn moved cautiously through the backyard. Margaret watched them, these creatures unaware of her existence, oblivious to her pain, to the question that haunted her every waking moment. What am I still doing here? The doorbell rang, interrupting her bitter thoughts. Margaret wiped her tears roughly with the back of her hand, leaving the broken cup where it lay as she made her painfully slow way to the door. "Gran, it's me, James," called a voice she recognized as her oldest grandson. "I have something for you." Margaret hesitated, embarrassed by her outburst, reluctant to let anyone see her in this state. But she opened the door anyway, revealing James standing on the porch, dirt on his hands, a burlap-wrapped object beside him. "Bad time?" he asked, taking in her tear-stained face with concern. "It's all bad time at my age," she replied, but stepped back to let him in. "What's that?" "It's a Japanese maple," James said, guiding her toward the patio where they could talk more easily. "Remember how you always talked about wanting one?" The unexpected gift caught Margaret off guard, momentarily displacing her anger. Decades ago, during a trip to Oregon, she had stood beneath the magnificent Japanese maple and declared it the most beautiful tree she'd ever seen. Thomas had scoffed, calling it impractical. After he left, she'd never found the right time or place to plant one of her own. "You remembered that?" she whispered, genuinely surprised that anyone had been listening. "Of course I did." James knelt beside her chair. "I've been saving up. These aren't cheap, you know." His attempt at humor couldn't mask the emotion in his voice. As James moved toward the door to begin digging the hole for planting, he spotted the broken teacup scattered across the kitchen floor. "What happened, Gran?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Margaret stared at him defiantly. "I threw it. Deliberately." "Why?" "Because I'm angry." The words burst out with unexpected force. "Because I'm trapped in this failing body, while the world keeps spinning without me. Because I worked all my life, raised 2 boys alone, saved lives as a nurse for 42 years, and now I'm just waiting. Invisible. Useless." Her voice broke on the last word. James stood silently for a moment, absorbing her outburst. Then, instead of offering platitudes or changing the subject as Margaret expected, he pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. "Tell me more," he said simply. The unexpected invitation to speak her truth, her raw, unfiltered truth, cracked something open inside Margaret. She told him about waking each morning wondering if this would be her last day, about the indignity of being spoken over by doctors and cashiers, about watching her friends die one by one until she alone remained, a relic of another time. "Do you know what it's like?" she demanded. "To look in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back? To wonder what value you have when you can no longer do the things that defined you? To ask yourself every single day, why am I still here? What purpose could this possibly serve?" James didn't try to answer her unanswerable questions. Instead, he reached for the broom and began carefully sweeping up the broken pieces of the teacup. "I can't fix any of that, Gran," he said finally. "I wish I could, but maybe I can help with this." He nodded toward the Japanese maple waiting to be planted. "Something that will grow when you're gone. Something beautiful that will remember you." Margaret's mind drifted back to decades earlier, when her body was strong and her spirit adventurous. She had raised 2 boys largely on her own after Thomas left, a betrayal that once threatened to destroy her, but ultimately revealed her true strength. "Mom, you've got to see this." Young David would call, his fishing line taut with the promise of dinner. At the nearby lake, 12-year-old Michael would already be setting up the campsite, determined to prove his independence. Those camping trips became their refuge, their church under the stars. When Thomas abandoned the family for his secretary and a new life in California, Margaret had taken her boys to Yellowstone instead of wallowing in grief. She remembered how they had stood together watching Old Faithful erupt, a metaphor for their own resilience. "We don't need him," Michael had said firmly, gripping her hand. "We have each other." The memory brought both warmth and a touch of sorrow. Michael now lived next door, checking in daily, but he had his own life, his own struggles with a recent divorce. Her grandsons visited when they could, bringing great-grandchildren who filled the house with noise before departing again, leaving silence in their wake. What is my purpose now? Margaret often wondered during those silent afternoons. When you can no longer do the things that defined you, who are you? She had been a nurse for 42 years, hands that healed and comforted. She had been a mother, a provider, a force of nature that kept her family moving forward. Now her hand shook when she tried to thread a needle, and her children lived their own lives largely independent of her influence. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Margaret reached for her walker, moving slowly toward the door. Her hearing aids weren't working well today. Another frustration to add to the growing list. "Gran, it's me," called a voice she recognized as her oldest grandson, James. He stood on the porch, dirt on his hands, a burlap-wrapped object beside him. "I brought something special," he said, guiding her back to the patio where he could be heard more clearly. "It's a Japanese maple. Remember how you always talked about wanting one?" Margaret felt tears forming. Decades ago, during a trip to Oregon, she had stood beneath a magnificent Japanese maple and declared it the most beautiful tree she'd ever seen. Thomas had scoffed, calling it impractical. After he left, she'd never found the right time or place to plant one of her own. "You remembered," she whispered. "Of course I did." James knelt beside her chair. "I've been saving up. These aren't cheap, you know." His attempt at humor couldn't mask the emotion in his voice. Later that afternoon, as James was digging the hole for the maple, Margaret sat watching him work. The physical labor reminded her so much of his father, David, the son she had lost. She felt the familiar surge of anger rise within her, the rage at a world that would take a young man with so much life ahead of him while leaving her to linger in her deteriorating body. "You should let me hire someone to help you with the yard work," James said between shovelfuls of dirt. "Mom tells me you've been trying to pull weeds again. You need to be careful." Margaret bristled. "I'm not dead yet," she snapped, the word sharper than she intended. "I may be old, but I'm not useless." James paused, leaning on his shovel. "I never said you were, Gran. You didn't have to. Everyone treats me like I'm made of glass or already gone." The emotion surprised her with its intensity. "Your mother sent over meals last week as if I can't cook. Michael keeps talking about safety features for the bathroom. The doctor speaks to me like I'm a child. Do you know what that's like? To be erased while you're still here." James set down his shovel and sat beside her. "I don't know what that's like," he admitted, "but I'm listening now." "Why am I still here, James? What am I doing here when all my friends are gone? When my body betrays me daily? What purpose does this serve?" The questions poured out, months of isolation finding voice. "I don't have those answers, Gran. No one does. The pastor says God has a plan, but what kind of plan includes the slow diminishment? The grief counselor after your father died told me to find meaning in small moments. Your Aunt Caroline keeps sending those ridiculous self-help books about embracing the golden years." Margaret's hands trembled with emotion. "I want to throw those books across the room. They don't understand. Nobody does." A tense silence stretched between them before James spoke again. "I'm not going to tell you how to feel about getting older, Gran. That would be pretty rich coming from me." Margaret appreciated his honesty, at least. "But I can tell you why I'm here today, planting this tree with you," he continued. "Last month, Tyler," he mentioned his 10-year-old son, "had a heritage project at school. He was supposed to interview family members about their lives. He interviewed you, remember?" Margaret nodded. She remembered the boy's earnest face as he recorded her stories on his tablet. "He came home changed after that. Started asking questions about the Depression, about how you put yourself through nursing school, about the civil rights movement you witnessed. Your stories made history real for him in a way no textbook could." James wiped sweat from his brow. "That's something only you can do, Gran. You're our living memory, our connection to a world none of us experienced firsthand." Margaret stared at the maple sapling, still wrapped in burlap. "When your father died," she said quietly, "I was so angry with God, with the world, with myself for being the one left behind. The grief counselor said all the right words, but I hated her for it. I hated everyone who tried to make sense of something so senseless." She paused, watching a cardinal land on the fence nearby. "Your Uncle Michael tried so hard. He kept talking about David, living on through his children, and God's mysterious ways. We had the worst fight of our lives. I told him to take his platitudes and leave me alone." "I never knew that," James said softly. "We don't speak of it, but for months after, I couldn't pray. Couldn't step foot in church. What kind of mother outlives her child? What kind of God allows it? What was the purpose in any of it? The memory of that dark time still felt raw, even decades later. When did that change? James asked. Margaret considered the question. It didn't, not entirely. The anger became something else eventually, a kind of hollow ache that I learned to carry. But I remember the day I stopped actively fighting against it. She pointed to a weathered bench at the edge of the yard. I was sitting there, much like I sit here now, asking those same questions. Why am I still here? What value do I have? And a hummingbird came and hovered right in front of my face, so close I could feel the air from its wings. She smiled at the memory. Such an impossible little creature, defying everything we know about flight. And I thought, if something so small and fragile can find its way in this big world, perhaps I could too, even carrying this grief. Not because someone told me I should, but because I chose to. James, there's something I want to tell you, Margaret said, reaching for his hand. When my time comes, I don't want a cemetery plot. I want my ashes scattered under this tree. James started to protest, but Margaret continued. My body will return to the earth, and my spirit will live on in something beautiful. This tree will outlive me, providing shade for your children and their children. Gran, that's a long way off. No, she interrupted firmly. It's not, and we both know it. And that's all right. I've been wrestling with this question of purpose for years now. Some days I still don't have an answer. Some days I still rage against all of it. But other days, she gestured to the maple, I see the beauty in knowing that nothing truly ends. It just changes form. A week later, Michael came by with more safety suggestions for her home. The conversation quickly devolved into an argument that had been brewing for months. I don't need a medical alert system. Margaret's voice rose, her frustration palpable. What I need is for you to stop treating me like I'm incompetent. Mom, be reasonable, Michael pleaded, the worry lines deepening on his face. You fell last month and couldn't get up for hours. What if that happens again when I'm out of town? Then I'll figure it out, just like I figured out how to raise 2 boys on a nurse's salary, how to keep this house after your father left, how to go on living after David died. The mention of her younger son's name hung heavy between them. Michael's expression hardened. This isn't about your independence, Mom. It's about your safety. It's about both. Margaret's hand trembled as she gripped her walker. Every day I lose a little more, my hearing, my strength, my place in the world. Do you know what the doctor said to me at my last appointment? For someone your age, you're doing quite well. As if that's supposed to be a compliment. As if I should be grateful just to be functioning at all. He was trying to be encouraging, Michael reasoned. He was reminding me that I'm on borrowed time. Everyone is always so surprised that I still have my mental faculties, as if I should have lost my mind along with my mobility. She turned away, looking out toward the newly planted maple. Do you know how devaluing that is? To be treated as if you're already half gone. Michael was silent for a long moment before speaking softly. I can't imagine how hard this is for you, Mom. But pushing away help isn't going to make things better. It's not about the help, Margaret said, her voice quieter now. It's about how the help is offered. It's about still having a say in my life, in my death, in how I'm remembered. She turned back to face her son. I've made decisions about my end-of-life arrangements. James is helping me with the paperwork. The color drained from Michael's face. You didn't think to discuss this with me first? I'm discussing it with you now, she replied evenly. I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of my wishes. The argument that followed was both painful and necessary. Years of unspoken fears and frustrations finally finding voice. Michael left angry, slamming the door behind him. Margaret sat alone afterward, emotionally drained but oddly peaceful. For the first time in years, she had stood her ground, insisted on her dignity. The conflict didn't feel good, but it felt right, a reclaiming of her voice. 3 days later, Michael returned, chastened and carrying a peace offering, a wind chime to hang near the maple tree. I've been thinking about what you said, he admitted as they sat together on the patio. About having a say. I don't want to take that from you. I'm just scared of losing you. I know, Margaret replied, reaching for his hand. I'm scared too sometimes. But more than that, I'm scared of disappearing before I'm gone, of becoming just Michael's elderly mother instead of Margaret. They began a new conversation then, one based not on protection but on partnership. Michael listened as Margaret articulated her fears about dependency. her frustration with physical limitations, her existential questions about her value and purpose in this final chapter. "I still don't have all the answers," she confessed. "Some mornings I wake up and wonder what the point is, why I'm still here when so many are gone. Other days, I find meaning in small things, teaching Caroline's daughter how to make pie crust the way my grandmother taught me, listening to Tyler's school troubles, watching the maple grow a little each day." "You're teaching us how to age with grace," Michael suggested. Margaret laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "Oh, I don't know about grace. I'm often angry, frequently stubborn, sometimes bitter. But I'm still seeking, still questioning. Maybe that's enough." That evening, after Michael left, Margaret sat watching the sunset paint the young maple's leaves in golden light. She thought about her life, how she had risen from abandonment to build a life of dignity and purpose, working double shifts at the hospital to put food on the table while never missing a baseball game or school concert. She thought about her faith, tested by hardship but ultimately strengthened. She hadn't always understood God's plan, especially when Thomas left, or when David died in that car accident at just 37. Those dark days had nearly broken her. For months, she had questioned everything she believed, angry at a God who would take a son before his mother. It was in the midst of that questioning, not after it was resolved, but while still wrestling with it, that Margaret had found a deeper form of faith, not one that provided easy answers, but one that made space for doubt, for rage, for the messy complexities of being human. "I still don't know why I'm here," she whispered to the darkening sky. "I still don't understand the purpose of this lingering. But maybe understanding isn't the point." She remembered an argument with her sister last Christmas, when Eleanor had insisted that everything happens for a reason. "That's nonsense," Margaret had retorted, causing a strained silence around the dinner table. "Sometimes terrible things just happen. The meaning doesn't come prepackaged with the pain. We have to forge it ourselves, hammer it out of the raw material of our grief and our joy and our ordinary days." Eleanor hadn't spoken to her for weeks afterward. Margaret hadn't apologized. Some truths were worth the discomfort they caused. 2 nights later, a violent storm swept through the area. Margaret lay awake listening to the wind howl, worrying about the young maple tree, too newly planted to have deep roots. In the morning, she was relieved to find it still standing, bent but not broken by the night's fury. As she stood examining it through the window, she noticed James's truck pull into the driveway. He hurried to her door, concern evident on his face. "I came to check on you. And the tree," he explained, stepping inside. "Power's out all over town." "We're both still here," Margaret assured him. "A little worse for wear, perhaps, but standing." James went out to secure the maple with stakes and twine, ensuring it would grow straight despite the storm's assault. As Margaret watched him work, the parallel wasn't lost on her. She too had been staked and supported by family through life storms, allowed to grow despite forces that might have broken her. The next several weeks brought unexpected purpose as Margaret began recording her life stories at James's suggestion, not just the highlights, but the struggles, the questions, the moments of doubt and revelation. She spoke candidly about her feelings of devaluation as she aged, her quarrels with well-meaning family members, her ongoing dialogue with God that was often more argument than prayer. "Why sanitize it?" she said when Michael expressed concern about her frankness. "What good is a fairy tale version of my life to those who come after? They'll face their own storms, their own questions about purpose and value. Let them see that I ask those questions too, that everyone does." The following spring, Margaret's health began to decline more rapidly. A minor stroke left her speech slightly slurred, her right hand less responsive. The indignities multiplied, more doctor visits, more medications, more help needed with basic tasks. "What am I doing here?" she asked the hospice nurse who now visited weekly. "Why linger like this?" The nurse, younger than Margaret's grandsons, offered platitudes about God's timing. Margaret waved them away irritably. "That's not an answer," she insisted. "That's what people say when they don't want to engage with the hard questions." The nurse looked startled, then thoughtful. "You're right," she admitted. "I don't know why some people linger and others go quickly. I don't know why you're still here when you feel ready to leave." "Thank you," Margaret said, surprised by the honest response, "for not trying to pretty it up." That night, alone with her thoughts, Margaret felt an unexpected sense of completion. The Japanese maple outside her window had survived its first year, was thriving in fact, new leaves unfurling in brilliant red against the spring sky. Her stories had been recorded, her wishes made clear. She had fought for her dignity, insisted on asking the difficult questions, even when others wanted to soothe them away. "Perhaps that's been my final purpose," she whispered to the empty room. "Not to find all the answers, but to keep asking the questions. To show that value isn't tied to usefulness or productivity. To rage against platitudes and insist on truth, even when it's uncomfortable." The next morning, Michael found his mother on her patio, peaceful in her chair, having passed quietly in the night. In her hands was a handwritten note with instructions for her ashes and a message. "Don't weep for me. I've lived an interesting life, traveled this great country, loved and been loved in return. I've asked the hard questions and made peace with not having all the answers. My body may be gone, but my spirit lives on in a beautiful tree, in your memories, and in the way you love each other. What a great way to end my days." True to her wishes, when spring arrived, the family gathered beneath the Japanese maple, its new growth of vibrant red against the blue sky. As Margaret's ashes settled into the soil around its roots, Michael placed his hand on the slender trunk. "Mom always said life finds a way to come full circle," he said to the assembled family. "She taught us that betrayal can be followed by redemption, that struggles make the peaceful moments sweeter, and that dignity isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise afterward." James stepped forward, his son Tyler beside him. "She also taught us to question everything," he added with a sad smile. "To rage when necessary, to doubt when doubt is honest, to reject easy answers that diminish complex truths." "She wasn't always easy," Michael acknowledged, "but she was always authentically herself. Even at the end, when her body was failing, her spirit remained fierce and questioning." Years passed. The maple tree grew tall and strong, its canopy spreading wider each season. On summer evenings, Margaret's great-grandchildren played beneath its branches, sometimes pausing to look up at the patterns of light filtering through red leaves, feeling an inexplicable sense of protection and love. Tyler, now a young man studying philosophy, often brought his textbooks to read under the maple's shade. "This is where I think most clearly," he explained to his friends. "My great-grandmother asked the big questions here, about purpose, about value, about meaning. It feels right to continue that tradition." And when autumn came each year, as the maple's leaves turned to brilliant crimson and gold, the family would gather to remember the remarkable woman whose spirit they believed lived on in its beauty, a woman who had faced life's hardships with grace, who had found redemption after betrayal, and who had taught them all that endings could also be beautiful beginnings. A woman who had never stopped asking, "Why am I here?" until she found an answer that rang true, not in platitudes or easy comfort, but in the honest pursuit of her own truth. The maple stood as a testament to Margaret's final wisdom, that we are all, in the end, part of something greater than ourselves, a continuing story of struggle, love, and ultimately peace. Not a peace that comes from having all the answers, but one that emerges from having had the courage to ask the questions in the first place. Reflections to write down. Insights from Margaret's journey. Resilience after betrayal. 1. When life breaks your trust, focus not on what was lost, but on what remains and can still be built. 2. Dignity in adversity. True strength isn't about never facing hardship. It's about maintaining your self-worth through life's challenges. 3. Creating meaningful memories. The richest inheritance we leave isn't material wealth, but the moments we've shared with loved ones. 4. Finding purpose in different seasons. Each stage of life offers unique opportunities for growth and contribution. 5. Legacy through nature. Our connection to the natural world can provide comfort and continuity beyond our physical existence. 6. Releasing regrets. Peace comes when we accept our past choices and focus on the present moment. 7. Faith through trials. Spiritual beliefs may be tested through suffering but can emerge deeper and more authentic. 8. Family as continuation. Our story extends beyond our lifetime through the lives we've touched and shaped. 9. Questioning value and worth. The courage to ask, "Am I valued?" and to insist on dignity even when others see only limitations. 10. Rejecting platitudes. Finding strength to push back against empty comfort in favor of honest wrestling with life's difficult questions. 11. Purpose and uncertainty. Embracing the search for meaning as valuable in itself, even when definitive answers remain elusive. 12. The right to self-determination. Claiming agency over one's life and death as an essential aspect of human dignity. We appreciate you taking this journey with us today through Margaret's story. We'd love to know what resonated with you most. Please share in the comments one insight you're carrying forward or how this narrative touched your own life experience. Every reflection you offer enriches our community and inspires our work. If Margaret's story moved you, consider supporting us with a like and subscription. It helps us continue creating these meaningful narratives that honor life's complexity and beauty. Until our paths cross again in the next story, carry peace with you.